And so the process of self-discovery is a never-ending work that just keeps going and going and going and going. And then I guess someday you die.
Yeah.
But when you sit down and you think about a person who died, there's the sadness of that is there's a feeling of they weren't done.
Mm-hmm.
That's level 3 existence.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to hold on to that idea when we're talking about this "what are you all about" question. It's a question that is time-bound in what are you all about right now? What is your current understanding of that? Can you operate in it? Can you create value with it? Can you do something that matters for people who care with that?
Right.
And in the process, also be learning more about that.
Welcome back to the Hard But Worth It podcast. And if you're enjoying what you're getting out of our videos, we just ask you to subscribe, to like it, share it. We appreciate you tuning in. Today, Kirk, we're continuing our conversation around the third question in our framework.
Yep.
So it's the "what are you all about?"
Mm-hmm.
And we talked in the previous episode, we gave a little more context, but you are the vehicle. Who you are matters in how you show up and deliver whatever it is, where you are to where you're going. It makes me think of the Disney movie The Lion King, which I'm sure you saw back when you were raising kids, and of course I still probably have parts of it memorized.
It is one of the great ones.
It is one of the great ones. But we know that Simba finds himself in a "who am I" moment, and he's running with Timon and Pumbaa. He had this major breakdown in his life. It sent him off to do this self-discovery of who I am, and what we realize is he becomes miserable in that moment because he's trying to live into a false identity of who he really is. Even though Timon and Pumbaa are fun, it's the slimy yet unsatisfied life. So he returns back to the Pride Land, and we know this home. But it was the monkey, Rafiki. It's the Rafiki moment, right? That he realizes is swinging in the trees, and he's discouraged because he's lost his dad, and it's his whole moment. But I think it's Rafiki who points to him and says, "You don't even know who you are." Remember? Remember the monkey? And it sent him into this moment of realizing others might even know who I am, because Rafiki knew who he was. He said, "You're Mufasa's boy, right?"
Yeah.
So it's this weird tension of, I think, a level of suffering sometimes when we're living into who we're not, maybe avoiding who we are, and at some point we align, we accept maybe other voices in our life to go who we really are and who we might be wired to be, where we finally start to find the fulfillment and living into and living from that place. But anyway, I thought that might be a fun little way to start this.
I think that's the point of that whole story, right? Is a character running away from who they are. And what part of what we know is young Simba sings a song, "I Just Can't Wait to Be King."
Yeah.
He knew he was going to be king someday.
That's
he was
right.
not confused about where he was going in his life, but he was holding it. And I think in that song, he holds it in this very trivial way. This, "I can't wait to be in charge. I can't wait to have everybody waiting on me." And it turns out being king is a heavy, heavy burden.
Absolutely.
Being a leader is a heavy burden. It's one of the worst jobs in the company, not one of the best, right? Patrick Linciconi, in his book, The Motive, he says, look, the reason that you're getting the big salary in the corner office and the big airplane is because you also have the worst job.
That's right.
It's a trap, right?
Well, in the last episode, you started talking about how exhausting it can be.
Yeah.
When we're trying to put something on.
We run away from it.
We run away from it.
And we end up, and he goes and he plays.
Yeah.
Right? It's a mythology. It's a mythological story that's been told over and over. It's very much the Pinocchio story as well. And we end up somewhere where we don't belong. It doesn't fit. And it's not fulfilling. Mm-hmm. We're trying to be something we're not. Mm-hmm. And what we always say to clients is, when you're not very good at not being you, when you're trying, it's exhausting. And about the best you can do is produce mediocre results. And there's a level of suffering involved in that you can get out of anytime you want. You can just walk right out of that experience anytime you want into what you know you're going to go do. But sometimes we have to go play with this other space
Right.
and let it get bad enough that the weight or the heaviness of stepping into who we actually are becomes, it's like, well, I have
Because
to do
for
that.
Timon and Pumbaa, I mean, they were living the life.
They were doing exactly what they were designed to do.
They were.
Like, please don't change those two.
That's right.
In fact, you might even bring them along for some levity in this heavy life,
Exactly.
but you can't be them.
Yeah.
Simba's not Pumbaa.
Yeah. So help us unpack this in another way. But how do we begin to do the work of facing, discovering, and maybe embracing who we are?
I think there's a way in which we have this notion of who we are. It's embedded in us to a degree. I don't think it's a stamp that is indelible, and I think over time it develops as well. There's a both and involved there. But somehow in the development of it, we also realize we might have always known this. But you have to go out and you have to try stuff. You have to go out into the world and put on things that don't fit. You've got to, but when that becomes a mechanism through which you're knowingly avoiding what you've learned, that's when you get into a problem. So I have no problem with people trying things that don't work. That actually is probably necessary.
Sure.
But there comes a point at which it's like dating. All right, you started a relationship.
You're dating yourself.
You're dating yourself. And there's a point at which you tried to put on a role or a character in the
Yeah.
world and it doesn't fit. You got to break up with it. But we don't. We end up getting married to it. We develop patterns and habits
Sure.
that make it a lifelong journey for us. And, all of a sudden you wake up when you're 40 years old and it's like, how did I get here?
Yeah.
To go out into the world and start to discover these things is necessary. You have to have a theory about who you are, and then you have to put it to work. And it's amazing how many people will do all this inner work or figure out their being, but they've never done anything with it. And then they go out in the world and they do something with it, and the feedback is so profound that it changes their sense of being, right? So when someone says, this is who I am, and I'm like, well, have you done anything about it? They're like, no. It's not that I don't believe them, but I don't trust them.
Yeah.
Because it has to be activated.
Right.
So there's a cycle there. And that cycle helps introduce us to ourselves. And then there's this idea that a lot of people who talk about the self in the self-help world or the coaching world talk about the authentic self. Find your authentic self or find your essential self. And I think that's right. That is the pursuit. But sometimes there's this layered in idea that you can actually find it. And I think that's a bit dangerous.
Yeah.
Because wouldn't it be awesome if someone could help me find my true self finally?
Right.
Because then I would know that I was doing the right thing. And I wouldn't have to keep running all these experiments. But it turns out that running the experiments is how you find your
Absolutely.
increasingly
Yeah.
authentic self.
Yeah, and it is kind of layered, like you said, and maybe a little even nuanced in that too, because you think of the car salesman job or the the role, and how many of us have said, well, that's not me. I would never do that. That's not me. And we assume that job is not me, when really what we're saying is the way that job's been projected to me, I could never do it that way. But those who actually show up as successful car salesmen and women have found a way to overcome the cultural stigma about the bad car salesman,
Right.
and actually do it really well.
Right.
So they've been able to navigate through the layers and the nuance of something, realizing where some of us, we avoid or we disqualify ourselves, say, well, that's not me. I'd never do that. That's not me.
It's not the authentic me.
It's not the authentic me. When in all fact is, no, actually, you might be able to show up right up in there if you showed up as who you really are in that.
And discovered, you might actually find out more about who you are by doing something that you don't currently think is authentically you. And in the process of doing that, be introduced to your authentic self,
really good.
or more of yourself. And so part of the journey of self-discovery, self-awareness, this idea we're playing with, the who are you and what are you all about question, is moving from the known to the unknown, which is what a lot of life is about. And so if you're moving from the known to the unknown, you're moving from what you're confident in, what you're good at, what you understand to be you, into what you have yet to understand to be you. And if you think that through, that can feel like moving from authentic to inauthentic.
Yeah.
Or something that feels like not me yet. And it could be that it's not you, but it could be that in the process of doing that, the sense of authentic self that you currently carry grows.
Yeah.
And now you're even more authentically you, even though you're doing something that 6 months ago felt disingenuous.
Right. Yeah.
We often introduce this idea through the idea of existence, which in philosophy we call ontology. What is your ontology? And ontology is simply this. Simply, if you simplify it, it's something like...
It doesn't sound like a simple word.
It's not. But if you put it in a simple format, what you get is, can you make a list of everything that you think exists? And of course you can. It's too long to actually make, but whatever's on that list is your ontology. It's what you think exists, and it's a study of existence. And so most people can make lists of things that exist, but my list might be a little bit different than yours, which is interesting, and that's what makes this fun. So we ask this ontological question about existence, and do you exist? And of course I exist. And it's like, yeah, but in what form? And we talk about the 3 levels of ontology, 3 levels of existence. So if I was sitting in a room with 100 people in it, and I just asked the question, do unicorns exist? Of course, they know it's a setup, so nobody raises their hand, right? But the answer is no. Clearly no. Right. Unicorns don't exist. But what's interesting is if I then asked everyone to draw a unicorn, they all could. And if I asked them to test each other, everyone would say, yeah, those are unicorns. So it seems as though they exist.
Yeah.
Well, we call this level 1 existence. And level 1 existence is simply things that exist in our mind, but not in reality. Meaning, you can conceive of them. They're a concept and we can actually share that concept, but you can't point at them. So then run a new experiment. All right. Now, everybody draw a horse. Do horses exist? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Horses exist. Okay, awesome. Draw a horse. Yep. They exist in your mind. Now, let's go on a field trip and yep, that's a horse. You can point at a horse. So that's level 2, things that exist in our mind and exist in reality. Level 3 existence is where things get a bit weird. And people who are materialists are going to tell you that level 3 is really just level 1. But I don't think that's right. Level 3 is things that exist in reality, but not in our mind. And it doesn't mean that we don't have an awareness of them. It's just that we literally say, I can't wrap my mind around that. Level 3 is things like infinity and mercy, maybe beauty, love, God, things like that. And a lot of people try to put things from level 1 into level 3, right? We call that superstition. It doesn't. And the problem with that is it actually doesn't explain reality very well. But level 3 existence are things that we're still trying to understand about reality that are real, but we don't know how to can't quite grab it. All right. So if someone accepts those 3 definitions, the question is, do you exist? So let's go with yes. Are you level 1? No, because I can point at you. So it really seems like you have level 2 existence, but I think that's wrong. I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I think you have level 3 existence. I think you are bigger, more complex, and more interesting than you will ever be able to contain. You cannot wrap your mind around yourself. And so the process of self-discovery is a never-ending work that just keeps going and going and going and going. And then I guess someday you die.
Yeah.
But when you sit down and you think about a person who died, there's the sadness of that is there's a feeling of they weren't done. That's level 3 existence.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to hold on to that idea when we're talking about this what are you all about question. It's a question that is time-bound in what are you all about right now? What is your current understanding of that? Can you operate in it? Can you create value with it? Can you do something that matters for people who care with that? Right. And in the process, also be learning more about that.
Yeah. And what's encouraging for me now at 51, I've lived a few years. I still feel like I'm 16, but I'm 51 based on
like it sometimes too.
That's right, exactly. But what's encouraging about that is it makes me feel like I've got a life of discovery. Like my best days aren't behind me. I haven't somehow peaked. I haven't somehow arrived, and it's at the end, in the middle of my journey. But there's a whole adventure waiting to be explored, which gives me for a lot of encouragement. In fact, in our framework, we talk about those peaks, and early on in our journey, we're reading, we're learning, we're educating ourselves. We're also learning from those who are mentoring us and our community. So there's a fast kind of incline of growth that initially is achieved. And then usually there's a bit of a plateau, and then there's another peak of learning where we can add to that more reading and skills and tactics.
And which one of those was your authentic self?
Yeah, exactly. All of them.
All
of them. But then you hit another plateau, and usually there's a point, though, 1, 2, or 3 peaks in our life where we go, okay, the way I've been discovering is no longer providing the same return on my investment. I'm not growing as fast as I used to because I've kind of learned everything, maybe not everything, but at this way of learning, I've learned most of what's out there. There might be another book, but I've read 10 already around that subject. So what we would say is rather than continuing to look out or look up for information or things to form us, we begin to turn in.
Yeah.
Which is a great picture for this because it's the inward journey of discovery that we believe we really start to open just this infinite capacity to know ourselves, to grow into ourselves, and really reach a whole new level of success, fulfillment, flourishing that we would say too, never even experience in their life.
Yeah.
And that's the tragedy too when we do come to the end. Some because they just end too short. Their life ended at a stage where it was like, that should never happen. But others who peak at this level, maybe level 2, we might call it, and they just say, I'm going to stick here. And they never look in. And so they never reach that new level of meaning or...
Yeah. It's the big deep, right?
The big deep.
This draw. It can be a journey into... it can be triggered by really hard circumstances sometimes, or it can be triggered by absolutely phenomenal circumstances. I have a client I worked with for years, and he's middle of his life, very successful, and he sold his company. It's the big win, and it's kind of now what? It's this difficult question on the other side of that kind of success, and it causes this. It's almost like dropping into the abyss in a way, right? Yeah, but it's where a lot of us can at that season of life, and it takes a few decades to get there because you have to build you have to scaffold up to it in many ways. But no matter where you are in that journey, playing with the question, what are you all about? What makes you tick? How do you create value? And it's a question of distinctiveness. It's not how do you fit in? And oh man, do we want to fit in? And that's good. Like, please don't necessarily fit out.
Right.
But once you're in, the question is, how do you contribute? And you don't contribute by doing what everybody else is doing. If we need you to do the thing that you do, because I'm not that good at it. I need you to be the tool you are so I can be the tool I am. If the whole toolbox is full of hammers, we have a very serious problem unless the entire world is nails.
That's right.
This question goes on and on and on and on. And I think that's the best part of it. I think that's why it's such a life-giving question. It is difficult to actually sit with because there's so many easy off-the-shelf answers. We find them in roles. We find them in taking on what other people say about us. And, it's what do you do? I'm a CPA. I'm a salesman. I'm a this. Now I understand myself. I understand you. We're good. It's a little thin. That journey into the deep is where I think some of the highest value resources are.
Yeah.
But the problem is you're journeying into something that is tender, that is vulnerable. And when you find that and you bring it out into the world, that's an act that can be scary. So it's easier just to, get along. It's fine.
Stay comfortable.
Stay comfortable.
Yeah. So moving forward, maybe a couple more episodes we're going to do. I think one of the questions we want to unpack is, how do we do this work more practically?
Yep.
How do I start the journey of doing self-discovery? And maybe there are stages that we can enter into. There's those who've never started it. How do you enter? And then when you hit certain milestones where you go, okay, it's time for this version of discovery. I think there's levels. But then also, why do we stop? I think it's a fair question. What are some of the barriers along the way that causes us to stop growing or stop doing the self-discovery? because we all recognize we're human. And if I just look back at my life, I have these moments where there's just these pause moments. There's these blips. And I'm like, what's that about? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, I stopped. Something stopped here. Mm-hmm. And then it picks back up. And you're like, okay, just a little plot line. Sometimes it's like going all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, we're learning in that even in those moments, when we decide to get back on the growth journey, none of that is wasted. Mm-hmm. It's only wasted when we choose to stop and learning from it.
Yep.
But I think there's a fair conversation there to go, why do we stop?
Yep.
And so tune in next time, because we're going to talk about how you can start those journeys or how you can enter into next stages. And then also we're going to talk about why we might stop along the way.